Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the remainder of the Thousand Year Blood War arc and for the light novels Can't Fear Your Own World and Spirits Are Forever With You in the video to follow. Since the Thousand Year Blood War arc came to a close in 2016, much of the wider Bleach story has been sustained and explored through the many light novels that have accompanied the series thereafter. Specifically, the two most prominent ones, Spirits Are Forever With You and Can't Fear Your Own World. Today, I wanted to go over the major light novel exclusive characters one by one to kind of see what they're all about, the individual style and perspectives they each bring to the Bleach universe, in stories that often feel quite different and even estranged from the core manga narrative. Since we'll be going over essentially every major new character introduced, these won't be deep dive looks detailing every little plot beat each character undergoes in the novels. Instead, this is designed to act as a holistic overview, a refresher of the light novel's biggest names and faces, to learn what they're up to, what they're all about, and crucially what they're capable of. There are quite a few characters to go over today, so let's get started. Remember to let me know down in the comments which of the light novel characters is your favourite and who you'd like to see more from, if possible. And of course, before we do get started on today's video, I just want to say a massive thank you to all of the new subscribers to the channel over the last couple of videos. I really do appreciate the support, and again, if you want to help us push to 300,000 subs by the end of 2026, it would be a great help and greatly appreciated. And also consider becoming a patron over on Patreon as well, the link you can find in the description below. Again, that's where you really can support the channel that extra step further. Again, just like all of the new patron supporters who have joined us recently, again, your support over there means absolutely everything, so thank you all so very much. But again, no matter how you choose to support the channel, even if it's just being here, watching this video today, it really does mean everything, so thank you all so very much. So, perhaps the most famous and consequential of the light novel exclusive characters, and in my opinion the best place to begin, is Tokinada Tsuneyashiro, the monstrous villain of Can't Fear Your Own World, and a member of the mysterious and seemingly all-powerful Tsuneyashiro noble house. As the central villain of Can't Fear Your Own World, Tokinada's primary goal is to replace the new Soul King in the wake of the Thousand Year Blood War arc with one of his own making. His apprentice of sorts, Hikone, whom we'll also get into a bit later. While his ultimate scheme is actually to reveal the existence of the Soul Society to the people of the world of the living, thereby completely upending their belief systems and throwing their lives into disarray. Tokinada is interesting in that he feels quite different from most other villains in the series, in a way that's actually kind of refreshing. There are very few villains in Bleach who are completely irredeemable or totally unrepentant. Even the very worst, the most despicable tyrants, like Yhwach or Baragon, are fleshed out with either a complex motive or a tragic past to at least accompany their abhorrent natures and actions, even if they don't justify them. But that isn't the case for Tokinada. He's kind of had everything given to him on a platter. He certainly doesn't have a sad childhood or anything like that. He's just pure evil, plain and simple. And I kind of like that he spreads misery and turmoil, chaos and strife for no other reason than the love of the game. Now, admittedly, he does have a reason for being this way. Not a traumatic childhood, no, but upon learning the truth of the original sin, the evil act that was behind the creation of the Soul Society itself, at least in the light novel, though it does kind of feel like the anime is maybe straying away from this somewhat, Tokinada decided that the world around them as it currently existed was meaningless, and that those who live within it should be able to act with total malice as a result, free of guilt or burden. As a result, Tokinada is both nihilistic and sadistic, and enjoys nothing more than watching other people fall into despair, as the reality of their world shatters around them for one reason or another. At times, working alongside his immensely powerful family in the shadows, Tokinada is responsible then for the downfall of several characters in the manga itself, though we wouldn't know that until Can't Fear Your Own World released. As a member of the nobility, Tokinada was arranged to be married, and he found his way to a promising young Shinigami who had escaped the Rukongai slums. Kakyo, a character whom we actually have seen in the manga before, though she was never named, as she was the best friend of none other than Kaname Tosen. Tokinada wanted to build her up and then rob her of everything in order to break her, but Kakyo refused to be broken. In the end, Tokinada simply murdered her, a brutal act that forced Tosen onto his path of vengeance, disguised as justice. Tokinada and his family were also responsible for turning Ginjo Kugo against the Soul Society and his transformation into a criminal. Against Ukitake's wishes, Tokinada pushed for adding surveillance functionality to Ginjo's substitute Shinigami badge, while the Tsuneyashiro family orchestrated the savage assassination of Ginjo's Fullbring allies in the human world, leading Ginjo to fight back and kill the assassins in turn, resulting in him being branded a traitor before he disappeared. So yeah, even though he doesn't appear in the manga, Tokinada's evil influence is far-reaching. And I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. Now, I like it in some respects, but I'm just not sure that he should have been used as a catch-all device to plug as many gaps as possible once the manga was over. Him being responsible for Tosen's fall? That's pretty awesome. Him being responsible for Ginjo's turn? That's pretty awesome. Him being responsible for both of them? Well, I'm not really sure about that, but ultimately it is pretty cool nonetheless. Anyway, during the chaos of the Second Quincy invasion, Tokinada sneaks into the royal palace in order to steal a very special ZANPAKUTŌ from Oetsu City, Ikomikidomoe, setting the events of Can't For Your Own World into motion. Speaking of ZANPAKUTŌ, Tokinada's own ZANPAKUTŌ was confiscated after he murdered his wife, which is kind of interesting, I think, as I'm not sure we've ever really seen evidence of that happening before, at least in the canon manga, and it makes me wonder, was Kisuke's Benihime, for example, confiscated when he was arrested in Turn Back the Pendulum, and if so, how did he get it back? Did Yoruichi manage to steal it back for him when she infiltrated the Central 46? As a result, though, Tokinada wields the ancestral Tsuneyashiro family ZANPAKUTŌ, Enrikyoten, a cursed evil blade that permanently reduces the wielder's lifespan for as long as they wield them, though again this was acceptable to the nihilistic Tokinada. Enrikyoten Shikai also can't be released unless the wielder themselves is injured, which is a cool touch, but once activated the blade has the ability to copy any ZANPAKUTŌ abilities that Tokinada has previously seen, and can even use multiple different abilities at once. Though, as an interesting trade-off, the powers used by Tokinada are only as strong or weak as Tokinada himself is in comparison, respectively. So again, while this is a really cool power, the ability to essentially mimic other people's powers isn't all that unique, I think, and is disappointing, especially considering in the previous light novel by Narita, Spirits Are Forever With You, this is essentially just a riff on another ability introduced there. It's very, very similar to Roka Paramiya's Negation Threads, which again, we'll get into in a minute. But yeah, Tokinada is an interesting figure, and I'm definitely an advocate for villains who are just evil for the sake of being evil. There's always room for a character like that, especially in a cast as big as Bleach's, and ultimately he's brought down by a nameless assassin, which again I quite like as well, because it works on a number of different levels. Tokinada himself dies gloating that no one was able to kind of get their revenge on him, that no one was able to make it better for themselves, but at the same time you can also see it as the will, the spirit of the Serete of the Gotei 13 being what eventually takes him out in the end, as though he was rejected by the Soul Society at large. Next up, we have another of Can't For Your Own World's most vital characters, Hikone Ubuginyu, an artificial soul who plays a central role in Tokinada's ultimate scheme. Hikone is a fascinating character and in many ways feels like the logical endpoint for many of Bleach's themes. As the series escalated introducing concepts like the Soul King, pieces of the Soul King, perfect hybrids and more, Hikone ends up being the amalgamation of much of that, and absolutely feels like a place some villain would inevitably end up looking. An attempt at creating their own version of the Soul King to usurp what's already there, and thereby control the universe by proxy, which of course is what Tokinada tries to do. Hikone was built by the combined efforts of the Fullbringer Aura Michibane and former Gotei 13 member Seinosuke Yamada, but even then the two of them were unable to stabilize the child's form. It was only after Tokinada himself acquired the brain of Sternritter V the visionary Gremi Thamo, again, never confirmed but speculated to be the brain of the Soul King himself, that Hikone's creation was completed and they were brought to life. As Tokinada's puppet, essentially, Hikone adores their villainous father and follows his orders absolutely with a childlike enthusiasm and naivety. Hikone isn't inherently a bad person at all, but their power is being used to further an evil goal, which itself is backed by a completely misguided worldview. Due to only having a very young, very basic understanding of the world and of morality, Hikone is easily manipulated and moulded by Tokinada, even willing to unrepentantly attack and kill those Tokinada targets, even people with whom Hikone has an otherwise pleasant budding relationship. Hikone is perhaps the most vital antagonist of Can't For Your Own World, in that they are the character the audience engages with the most, and are involved at the centre of almost every major conflict. To that end, at least in my opinion, the most interesting thing about this character is the way they depict a possible alternate reality and even potential future, I guess, for Ichigo. While Ichigo is a naturally occurring hybrid of all the major races of Bleach, Hikone is also a hybrid, albeit an artificial one. But this means the child has had access to all forms, all variations, all avenues of their power from the very start, unlike Ichigo, who has slowly, admittedly quite slowly, learned and gained access to them over the course of the narrative. This means that from Hikone, we get to see an immediate vision of what a fully realised Ichigo could maybe look like in the future. A character who freely wields aspects of all the individual races, from utilising hollow techniques like Sonido to move quickly, or Hiero to protect themselves, and then combining that further with the Quincy technique Blue Vein. They can fire a Sero like a Hollow, manipulate Reishi like a Quincy, and even utilise Bringer Light like a Fullbringer. As I said, this is my favourite aspect of Hikone's character, getting the chance to see this potential unleashed, and in creative ways too, such as Hikone combining abilities that otherwise would never be combined, like Sero and Heilig File. By the end of the novel, Hikone and their hollow ZANPAKUTŌ Ikomikidomoe have caused a lot of trouble and a great deal of damage across the various worlds of Bleach, and fought a variety of seemingly disparate characters from Arrancar to Sternritter, and eventually even Zaraki himself, before taking on Hisagi, who reveals his Bankai in the battle against Hikone. And once Ikomikidomoe betrays Hikone and steals a number of the Soul King fragments that were used to help build the child, Hikone's overall spirit energy plummets, bringing them back in line with the rest of the cast and setting up their potential future to come as they build a life for themselves under the watchful tutelage of Hisagi. Then, as we've just discussed Hikone, it makes sense to discuss their weapon of choice, Ikomikidomoe, who is definitely one of Can't For Your Own World's most unique, unusual, and interesting characters. Ikomikidomoe is an ancient and all-powerful Hollow, who in some of the earliest days of the Soul Society even battled a young Yamamoto before attempting to devour the very Soul King himself. Ultimately, though, he was defeated by Ichibei, who erased the Hollow's name using Ichimonji before Oetsu sealed it away within a ZANPAKUTŌ, creating essentially the first and only Hollow ZANPAKUTŌ. At least until Zangetsu, I guess, albeit in a very different way. The events of Can't For Your Own World are set into motion when Tokinada breaks into the royal palace and steals the sword during the Vandenreich's invasion, before eventually giving it to Hikone in order to manipulate the child into acting out his orders. While Hikone is technically Ikomikidomoe's wielder, the Hollow has no regard for him and often acts of its own accord, opening Garganta and even speaking with those around it. Ikomikidomoe knew and respected Baragon greatly, with the two of them agreeing to a non-aggression pact many, many years ago, before Aizen even arrived in Hueco Mundo back when Baragon was still the king of the Hollows. Meanwhile, Ikomikidomoe looks down on other Hollows that it deems to be weaker than itself, much younger Hollows such as Grimjo and Lupi. Alongside the usual hollow techniques such as Sero and Sonido, Ikomikidomoe has a number of more unusual bespoke powers at its disposal, such as the ability to conjure a horde of ravenous smaller hollows and evolve infinitely by assimilating the spirit energy of its victims. Its own Reiatsu causes those around it to shudder in an instinctual fear. Ikomikidomoe has a number of different releases, each one unleashing more and more of its true strength. The first release conjures a gigantic arm, while the second summons a massive monster, which is the one that we've actually seen. The third release transforms Ikomikidomoe into a more humanoid, albeit still huge, hollow creature. Now, Ikomikidomoe spends much of the light novel engaged in massive skirmishes and battles against various foes, including the former Espada. While Ikomikidomoe was rendered unable to say its true name and thus unleash its true power thanks to the curse placed upon him by Ichibei, Hikone knows the Ancient Hollow's full name, and calls it out towards the end of the fighting, essentially fusing themselves with the Ancient Hollow. However, once Hikone has been greatly weakened by Hisagi's Bankai Fushi no Kojo, Ikomikidomoe's true intentions become known. Having siphoned power from a Soul King fragment within Hikone, Ikomikidomoe materializes itself forcefully and tries to kill the child, only for the Fullbringer Aura, who we'll talk about in a moment, to sacrifice herself to protect Hikone instead. Still, Ikomikidomoe begins to fully materialize all the same, and having taken a piece of Ryo's power, finds that Ichibei's curse is weakened, and prepares to speak its true name. Before it can, however, the Hollow is instantly defeated in a single swing by Kenpachi, reducing it to a mere sword once again. And I've got to be honest, that's probably my least favourite plot development in maybe the entirety of Can't Fear Your Own World. It sounds and feels ridiculous to me, and just kind of seems like they were rushing to reach the end of this particular character's arc. And it's also unclear to me as well if by the end there Ikomikidomoe did actually regain its full power or not, or if it didn't get the chance to, as it didn't get the chance to recite its full and true name prior to Kenpachi just showing up and one-shotting it. So I guess that's up in the air as well. Another intriguing and absolutely vital character in Can't Fear Your Own World is the Fullbringer Aura Michibane, who in many ways upends what we originally thought a Fullbringer should, and yes, even could be. Aura makes for a very unexpected and unusual continuation of concepts introduced in the Lost Agent arc, such as the fact that she now leads a religious cult in the human world called Execution, converting people to her cause by performing miracles in front of them with her Fullbring powers. Speaking of her Fullbring, this is where things get rather strange, and where she most embodies this idea of changing up established concepts and ideas from when Fullbring was first introduced in the series. Unlike every other Fullbringer who wields a specific Fullbring based on their personal attachment, such as Ginjo's cross pendant or Tsukishima's bookmark for example, Aura has no such item. Aura's mother was attacked by a Hollow, as is the case for the other Fullbringers, and died during childbirth. This resulted in her father restricting her freedom greatly as she grew up, wanting to shelter and protect her from the dangers of the world, but in the most extreme way imaginable. As a result, Aura was never able to develop a personal attachment to anything, twisting the way her Fullbring operates. As such, she's only capable of wielding the most basic, universal powers of a Fullbringer, but magnified to an enormous, unparalleled degree. Thanks in part to her incredible spirit energy, which comes about as a result of her playing host to the Soul King Saketsu. This means Aura can manipulate the souls of any matter, including even the very elements themselves or her own body, healing her own injuries or even becoming totally intangible, going so far as to decapitate herself at one point, showing how she's able to essentially survive almost anything while utilizing her powers. Again, this kind of feels like the light novel's playing very fast and loose with established lore, but actually I do kind of like this. It kind of works for me, although based on everything we know about Fullbring, there should be something that she has a personal attachment to, But I also do like the idea, as I said, of this upending what we're supposed to know about Fullbring and how it works, and the fact that she doesn't have a personal attachment is materialized in the way her power works. She has no specific item. But that means that while she doesn't have an individual ability, like, for example, Tsukishima's Book of the End, or Giriko's Time Tells No Lies, based and centered around specific items, she can use the universal blanket powers, but to a much greater degree. That actually works for me, and I think it's pretty interesting. Having been approached by Tokinada, who shared her apathy towards the current state of the world, Aura would follow Tokinada's orders blindly, helping him to further his goals. By creating and expanding the influence of the execution cult, Aura, working with Yukio, was able to isolate Karakura Town for Tokinada's ultimate plan, and even helped him by creating a retainer for what would become Hikone, and later built a floating castle in the sky which would act not only as Hikone's seat of power, but also the catalyst for how Tokinada planned on revealing the existence of the spirit world to humanity itself. Ultimately, though, Aura betrays Tokinada to try and protect Hikone when the villain attempts to collapse the palace on them all, and is later killed by Ikomikidomoe when the ZANPAKUTŌ turns against a weakened Hikone. Despite this, Aura's ending is a happy and comforting one in the novel, as she dies content knowing that Hikone was saved, before her own soul is rescued by the Ranka, and she joins Nell and the others in Waco Mundo to bond with new friends, and embark upon a new beginning. I think Aura is another quite successful light novel character. All things considered, she works out quite well for me. She is another example of one of these new characters being monstrously overpowered, but again, ultimately I think it kind of works here. Okay, while this next character isn't a light novel exclusive one, they play a considerably larger role in Can't For Your Own World than they ever do in the manga. And that's Seinosuke Yamada, the former vice captain of the 4th Division over 100 years ago, turned general director of the Central Medical Institute in the Noble Quarter, which goes some way to explaining why we've never seen him again since Turn Back the Pendulum. And even then, Seinosuke's appearance in Turn Back the Pendulum is as minimal as can be. You see him standing behind Unohana in the Gotei 13's group shot, and well, that's literally it, though Kubo did draw him a small chapter omake too. If you recognise his surname, that's because Seinosuke is in fact the older brother of Hanataro, who is a character we've spent a fair bit of time with in the manga. Seinosuke was always an interesting character in my opinion, purely because while we knew next to nothing about him, the only thing we really did kind of know was that it was always suggested that he was sinister in some way, or had a bad nature to him. I can't help but feel like Kubo does kind of lean into that a bit in the colour page spread featuring the Gotei 13 from 100 years ago, which I also think depicts him as looking pretty sly. And I think that's emphasised somewhat in his appearance in Can't For Your Own World too, which shows him leaning into pushing the boundaries of medicine, while showing a clear disregard for what's considered ethical. In fact, even Hanataro tells Seinosuke that no one is a fan of his personality. But at the same time, Seinosuke cryptically warns Hanataro of the trouble brewing in Soul Society, even telling him to lay low for a while. Seinosuke was one of the chief architects in bringing Hikone, an artificial hybrid soul, to life. With Seinosuke at the helm, he and Aura compiled thousands of souls from the various races of Bleach, Shinigami, Quincy, Hollows, and Fullbringers, even utilising Soul King fragments to try and strengthen the Konpaku considerably, but to no avail. Although Hikone was technically alive, they couldn't move nor speak, and it was only once Tokinada implanted Gremmy's stolen brain as the final piece that Hikone was at last stabilised, and the artificial soul completed. Still, Seinosuke appears morbidly attached to Hikone, not wanting his partial creation to die, utilising extraordinary Kaido prowess to heal him, and even going so far as to explain that forcing life upon those who wish to die is his favourite hobby. But with that, we now move on to the other major light novel, Spirits Are Forever With You, and this novel introduces several additional key characters from the wider Bleach lore. And in fact, this novel actually released prior to Can't For Your Own World. It's just it feels like Can't For Your Own World has had a much bigger impact on the lore of Bleach and the community as well. But this novel has its fair share of cool additions as well, including a couple of the previously unknown Kenpachi. And so, we begin with the 7th Kenpachi, Kenpachi Kuruyashiki, who plays a small but pivotal role in the novel's story. Kuruyashiki is an immensely powerful, yet kind-hearted and honourable warrior, and one who was highly popular with not just the officers of his division, but other captains too, namely Kyoraku and Ukitake, with whom he'd often spend time drinking. And it was during one of these drinking sessions 250 years in the past when Kuruyashiki was approached by a mysterious man, who challenged him to a duel for the title of Kenpachi. Despite once being offered a place among the Zero Division due to his immense raw strength, something that was later contradicted by the manga's reveal of the criteria needed to enter the Soul King's enigmatic guard, Kuruyashiki was instantly defeated and cut down by the man's strange power, but nobly accepted his death, even as his loyal men cried out that the challenger must have cheated in some way. Kuruyashiki possessed a living ZANPAKUTŌ, similar in a way to Unohana's Minazuki, with his Shikai Gagaku Kairo taking the form of an alien-looking white blob, featureless save for a mouth lined with razor-sharp fangs. Kuruyashiki's Shikai was capable of conjuring a number of these creatures at once, while his Bankai, also named Gagaku Kairo, which again is interesting as Unohana's Shikai and Bankai share the same name too, although the kanji for Minazuki, Shikai, and Bankai differ, creating totally different meanings, whereas the kanji for Gagaku Kairo remains the exact same between both releases. Conjured a gigantic set of jaws from the ground that were so ravenous they devoured everything in sight, no matter what, save for Kuruyashiki himself. And if you haven't seen it yet, we actually discuss Gagaku Kairo's Bankai in my last video, looking at the riskiest, most dangerous Bankai to actually activate and use in Bleach. Considering the jaws had the ability to endlessly consume not just living organic material, but inanimate matter as well, Kuruyashiki was forbidden from using Bankai inside the Seirete by the Central 46, though it does suffer from a severe restriction. Once used, Gagaku Kairo's Bankai can't be reactivated for 6 months. So notoriously powerful and dangerous was this Bankai that the mysterious challenger who defeated Kuruyashiki believed his opponent would have won had he actually used it, but the good-hearted warrior had feared, swallowing up his subordinates in the carnage that would have ensued. Interestingly, and maybe even a bit arbitrarily, Spirits Are Forever With You also revealed that Kuruyashiki's lieutenant was at one point Ashido Kano, a Shinigami who had previously only existed in anime filler, and as far as said anime filler is concerned, is still hiding away in the Forest of Menos. Now, Ashido is an interesting filler character in that he's maybe the only one off the top of my head that I can remember who was actually supposed to appear in the manga, confirmed by Kubo himself, but Kubo simply ran out of time. Kuruyashiki is an interesting character, but there is one element about this guy that I'm not a huge fan of, and that's his design, because I just kind of think he looks like Ginjo. His face is literally Ginjo's face, albeit with long Kenpachi-style hair, an untamed mane of hair. But other than that, he's basically just Ginjo to me. His design pales in comparison to the next character that we're about to discuss, the other Kenpachi revealed in Spirits Are Forever With You, the one who usurped the title from Kuruyashiki. Perhaps the single coolest and most interesting character from any of the light novels, in my opinion, is the 8th Kenpachi Soya Azashiro, a member of the ancient Soul Society nobility and the primary antagonist of Spirits Are Forever With You. The noble Azashiro clan existed during a time of unspeakable brutality and cutthroat bloodshed in the Soul Society, where the noble families were wrapped and entangled in a constant power struggle with one another, scheming to try and bring rival families down. While the Azashiro family enjoyed a lengthy period of wealth and influence, eventually the axe came for them too, and their household was framed for crimes they didn't commit, resulting in them being thrown into a hollow fighting pit. The very same that Ganju almost falls into when fighting Yumichika. As a young child, Soya watched helplessly as his family was savagely torn apart around him, before his sister was the last one to be killed in front of him, defending him from the final hollow. However, the nobility who were overseeing this execution betrayed him further, condemning him to death by releasing additional hollows despite promising to free any survivors. And so Azashiro's mind broke, and his powers manifested around him completely involuntarily, slaughtering everyone, hollows and nobles alike. Azashiro then escaped into the Rukongai and vanished. Azashiro's ZANPAKUTŌ, and again we discuss his Bankai too in the previous video, is extremely unusual and unique within the Bleach universe, thanks to the way in which his powers forcibly manifested themselves in his youth in a completely unnatural way. Now, his ZANPAKUTŌ is constantly in its Bankai state, known as Urozakuro, and its power allows Azashiro to fuse with everything around him at all times, due to being constantly in Bankai. Due to his inner world being fused with the outside world, Azashiro can merge with all things, ranging from the very air around him to the buildings of the Seirei itself, going so far as to feel pain when Uryu, in his Let Steel form, subjugated and absorbed the reishi of the Seirei around him in the Soul Society arc. That in itself injured Azashiro, as he was technically a part of said buildings at the time, or said reishi. With a power like this, Azashiro is even able to circumvent Aizen's Kyokusuigetsu, and we get a nice shared moment between the two in Muken, though it takes him a couple of days to actually see through the illusions. As mentioned earlier, Azashiro resurfaces to kill Kenpachi Kuruyashiki and usurp his position as the current Kenpachi, immediately securing him access to the Gotei 13. Azashiro's desire is the complete and total annihilation of all hollows, stemming from a visceral hatred of hollows after watching his family, and specifically his sister, killed in front of him. In that sense, Azashiro boils down the very nature of a Shinigami, distilling it into his person, as though his existence is proof of what a Shinigami should be and should strive to do, taking us back to the central eternal struggle between the two races. Azashiro is driven to destroy all hollow life, and while he doesn't necessarily have evil intentions himself, he believes in cutting out all unnecessary things, and that extends to eradicating not just hollows, but hollow essence from humanity itself. To cut a long story short, Azashiro's ultimate plan as the antagonist of the novel is to fuse with all of humanity and erase a part of what makes them human. That capacity for evil, that potential to become hollows upon death, but in doing so, rob humans of individuality and free will at the same time, of choice, effectively lobotomizing the human race in one fell swoop. But again, Azashiro doesn't have specifically ill intent. He doesn't want to become a god or anything like that, but he does want to rescue humanity from what he believes to be the evils of hollowdom. And so, 249 years prior to the Bleach story, the Azashiro incident is enacted, wherein he tries to set his plan into motion, emerging from hiding in the Rukongai. When Azashiro initially tries to impress upon the Central 46 his purpose by demonstrating his ability to again effectively lobotomize a bunch of Rukongai citizens to prove it can be done as an example, he is then hunted down by the captains of the Gotei 13, and eventually gives up when he feels even the presence of the oncoming Zero Division. Essentially, upon realizing that even the Soul King himself wished to stand in his way, Azashiro relented, accepted his fate, and was imprisoned in Muken. And so, once we get to the present day, after Aizen's own imprisonment, Azashiro decides to leave Muken, rising like a spirit from the grave to try and unleash his plan once more. And so yeah, Azashiro is maybe my favourite single aspect of Spirits Are Forever With You. I love his design, of course, but his plan is interesting too. And as far as abilities go, while his is, once again, totally ridiculous and on a level basically unseen in the canon manga, very emblematic of the light novels, at least Azashiro's power is mixed into the actual plot of the novel as well, and is vital to his plan. Ultimately, Azashiro opts to return to Muken after his plan is foiled again, and he's nearly killed once his Bankai disappears. But his story ends with a lovely moment when the Zanpakuto spirit of Urozakuro removes her eye mask, and it turns out that she greatly resembles his deceased sister. Up next, we've got someone who feels like perhaps the breakout surprise star of Spirits Are Forever With You, and that's Roka Paramiya, who in my opinion is the single best example of the light novels plucking a completely innocuous, nobody background character from the actual manga and transforming them into, well, something frankly absurd, but still cool all the same. If you're wondering who Roka was in the manga, then look no further than chapter 229. At the start of the chapter, Ulquiorra visits Yami, who is having his arm reattached by an unassuming Arrancar nurse. When the nurse asks Yami if there's any loss of mobility or sensitivity in his arm, the Espada kills her instantly by crushing her head, moping that he normally would have been capable of splitting someone of her caliber in two. Yes, Roka Paramiya, one of the main characters of Spirits Are Forever With You, is this same nurse. And wouldn't you know it, she's capable of using Mugetsu. Okay, that's maybe a little disingenuous, and yeah, I've always found this character to be a little far-fetched for my liking, but there is still plenty that's very cool and interesting about her as well. Roka is absolutely key to the events of Spirits Are Forever With You, and a surprisingly tragic character. Prior to the start of the novel, Roka has lived a life of abuse under her master and creator Xyloporo Grans, who at the time was a Vasto lord under Baragon's employ, and who we'll talk about a little bit later. But he subjects her to awful experimentation and torture, cutting her up and stitching her back together over and over again, despite her being one of his fraction at the time. Xyloporo bestows the name Roka upon her, as it's the Spanish word for rocks, and to him that's all she is, a dull and lifeless lump that's practically worthless. Roka is actually involved in the story from a few hundred years prior, linking us back to the altercation we discussed a moment ago between Kuruyashiki and Azashiro. Earlier we discussed the tale of the two Kenpachi and how Kuruyashiki fought and was killed by Azashiro. But just before that, Kuruyashiki's blade is ensnared by a thin strand of web that emerges from a tiny garganta, and he hoists its host from hiding, revealing a small spider-like hollow, which Xyloporo then uses to spy on the ensuing fight between the Shinigami, a creature born of Roka Paramiya, who is a spider-like hollow in herself. By witnessing Azashiro's power to fuse with anything around him, Xyloporo ends up imbuing Roka with the ability of backup, giving her the power to generate spider web-like threads of negation, which becomes one of the major catalysts of the story itself. Now, negation as we know it is essentially a pocket dimension that the Espada can wield to imprison subordinates in, and it was also used to help Aizen and his cohorts flee the Soul Society due to being totally impenetrable. As such, with these threads, Roka can send, store, and retrieve information in a totally protected way. Eventually, Xyloporo grows bored of Roka once he harnesses the ability of Gabriel, which he was always after, and this leads to Roka's death in the canon manga, whereafter she then slowly rebuilds her head, drawing upon the power she's laid out across all of Hueco Mundo through her network of negation webs. Having stored numerous versions of herself and her memories within these backup webs, Roka essentially brings a backed up version of herself to life when one body is destroyed, reflecting her former master's desire to chase the idea of immortality. Interestingly though, it takes Roka so long to restore her body that she doesn't return to life until after Aizen's defeat and Xyloporo's death. But once the light novel gets going, really the plot of Spirits Are Forever With You essentially revolves around everyone trying to find Roka Paramiya for their own purposes, be that Don Kannoji, the Picaro, Cien Granz, or Azashiro. Cien, for example, wants to destroy Roka so her power can never be used against him, to create another version of him, turning him into simply Cien Granz #1, while Azashiro wants her power for himself, to enact his ultimate goal that we spoke of a moment ago, enabling him to fuse limitlessly with the entire world using her webs and transform all of humanity. Ultimately, though, it's Don Kanoji's relationship with Roka that brings out the surprising humanity in the character, as he tries to treat her to a life that she never knew. He tries to give her the simple joys in life, such as riding in a car, being bought gifts or sweets, and trying to teach her that life is meant to be enjoyed. Thematically, then, Roka is perhaps one of the deeper, light novel exclusive characters and absolutely feels like an abuse victim who was constantly existing under the watchful eye of Xyloporo, who never allowed her to be free or to escape. Ultimately, Roka manages to get one over her former master in a sense by defeating an echo of the strongest version of him, utilizing a vision of Mugetsu from the information in her threads that she gained by wandering Karakura Town, almost obliterating her own body in the process. In the end, Roka returns to Waco Mundo, and with the option to finally decide for herself what she wants to do in the future, her future, she ends up becoming a part of the new leadership of the Hollow race after Aizen's defeat, and finds a reason to live in looking after and caring for the vulnerable in Waco Mundo, even appearing in Can't Fear Your Own World at the end to help look after the fallen Aura. A previous Espada in Aizen's army, the Picaro, is the collective name for a group of childlike Aranka with the designation 102. Originally a group of living human children who were left to starve and die, they became a group of hollows who merged into a single Gillian. After evolving into an Adhuchas, the Hollow found and assimilated numerous other deceased children into the fold to help ease their loneliness, and to have someone else to play with. Although Aizen would name them an Espada once he took control of Waco Mundo, he eventually demoted them to Privaron Espada status. The Picaro are an interesting group of hollows and are completely unlike anything we've ever seen. While technically one singular entity at this point, they all bear totally different appearances, ranging from very humanoid to much more hollow-like. The Picaro operate from a shared pool of spirit energy, allowing them to designate Reryoku to specific members of the collective if necessary, in order to keep them alive. At the same time, this means they're all capable of utilizing certain abilities, such as Sero, even all at once, and half of them using Sero at the same time was enough to blow a gigantic crater in the desert of Waco Mundo. In their Resurrección Langosta Migratoria, the Picaro each grow insectoid wings, becoming something akin to a locust horde, and grow closer to that of a shared hive mind than before. The Picaro play a small but interesting role in the light novel Spirits Are Forever With You, as their childlike perception of the world leads them to being used and controlled by multiple sides, including initially working with the monstrous Cien Grands, before later being instrumental in his ultimate capture and defeat. The final character we're going to look at today is certainly a fun one, and a great example of the light novels getting pretty wild. Cien Grands is a clone of sorts of the 8th Division Xyloporo Grands, and as a result, you'll only understand the full story behind this villain if you at first know the direction Spirits Are Forever With You takes Xyloporo in the first place. In the light novels, it's revealed that Xyloporo was once a human alchemist, while his brother Ilfort was an army general, and the two of them worked together for an unnamed nation. Ilfort would bring Xyloporo prisoners of war for his brother to perform experiments on. However, those murdered victims would go on to become hollows, and in turn exacted revenge by killing Xyloporo and Ilfort for their crimes. Xyloporo, however, upon transforming into a hollow, was ecstatic at discovering a new plane of existence, and he devoured Ilfort, becoming an incredibly powerful Vasto Lord in Barragan's army, until Aizen cast the King of Waco Mundo down. When the traitorous Shinigami took control, he made the Vasto Lord version of Xyloporo the first Espada Zero of his army. However, Xyloporo eventually expunged his violent instincts from himself in the form of the hollow that was Ilfort himself, and as a result regressed back to an Adhuchas class Menos, with Aizen demoting him to Privaron Espada as a result. This is the Xyloporo that we see in the manga in the Neutra and Nell flashback, as Neutra comments that Xyloporo is no longer an Espada. It would take a while, but after honing his skills and abilities and developing new ones, Xyloporo would claw his way back up to the position of 8th Espada. And so that brings us back to the light novel exclusive character Cien, who was cloned, again in a sense, from Xyloporo's former self, prior to separating from Ilfort. As a result, Cien remembered everything from Xyloporo's past life. Cien also looked identical to Xyloporo, save for a tattoo of the number 100 on his eye, from which he eventually took his name. I say that he is only a clone of sorts because in the novel Cien is actually born thanks to Roka Paramia's power, as Xyloporo had poured his own memories and powers and a backup version of himself into her Negacion webs, from which this form comes forth, and initially starts out confused and perplexed by even his own existence, believing himself to be Xyloporo in reality, before an encounter with Mayuri forces him to come to grips with what's really going on, and to accept the strange conditions of his creation, that he, like Roka, is a backup version of an original that has come to life. Cien occupies a peculiar position in the novel overall. He's a destructive, turbulent whirlwind force who comes crashing through the narrative, a being with no real purpose and no understanding, and whose very life is constantly at risk as his reishi deteriorates thanks to Mayuri's intervention as he severed Cien from Roka's threads. Cien eventually travels to Karakura town following Roka's trail, whom he wishes to initially use as a tool to keep himself alive for longer, before later believing her power needs to be destroyed. Ultimately, Cien ends up locked in an intense duel with who else but Kenpachi Zaraki, with the two of them battling inside a Garganta, until Cien abandons the battle to give chase to Roka once more. Eventually, Roka damages Cien beyond repair with a version of Ichigo's Mugetsu as discussed earlier, leading to Cien attempting to kill Don Kunoji to help sustain his now rapidly failing form. In the end, Roka extends Cien a lifeline, form of one of her threads, to become something new as his body turns to dust, and he accepts her help, no longer bound to Xyloporo and Ilfort or their fate, but now capable of becoming something brand new. So again, Cien might be the weirdest character to come out of the light novels, and in doing so they also completely transform the perception of Xyloporo too. Although the two share incredible similarities, Cien acting as an echo of a much stronger and more bloodthirsty version of the scientist is an interesting concept, and also gives us a look at some of the tremendous power of the older Hollows who lived under Barragan's rule before Aizen's takeover. Going through this video looking at the individual characters that we've discussed up until now, it's clear that one major theme of the characters of the light novels, specifically the newly introduced ones, is that of new beginnings or fresh starts, as a number of these more troubled characters, rather than outright being killed, actually get the chance to start over and try again by the end. Hikone, Aura, Roka, Cien, all of these characters get a kind of new beginning as the climax of their developmental arc. Alright, but that's it for today's video, guys. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. These light novel characters are very interesting in their own right, and they each bring something unique to the wider lore of the Bleach universe. I've always especially been interested in the 7th and 8th Kenpachi, but I do really like basically all of the new characters from Can't Fear Your Own World specifically as well. Tokinada makes for an awesome villain, one who does feel quite different to the likes of Aizen and Yhwach, less nuanced maybe, but not every single villain needs to be ultra complex. There is room in a world like Bleach for a bad guy who's just evil for evil's sake, which again, I do quite like. But yeah, that's it for the video, guys. Like I said, although this has been a long one, I do hope it worked as a kind of refresher as to who the major players, the new major players of the light novels actually are. Who knows, maybe we'll see more from some of these characters in the future, depending on where the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime decides to leave things, where it decides to end up. Maybe Can't Fear Your Own World is on the cards. Spirits Are Forever With You, an adaptation of that feels much less likely to me, but to be honest, right now, it's all up in the air, and anything could happen. Let me know who your favourite light novel exclusive character is down in the comments below. Is there anything about these characters that I missed that you wanted me to discuss? Again, this wasn't supposed to be a full, deep dive, beat by beat plot discussion. It's an overview, a holistic refresher of the major players, but regardless, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already. Help us reach 300,000 subs by the end of the year. Consider joining the Patreon as well, just like everyone who's appearing on the screen now has, who helps to make this channel a reality here in 2026. Your support is going a very long way. When things on YouTube, frankly, are just not looking fantastic moving into the new year, but your support over there is helping out enormously, more than you could ever know, really, and I am eternally grateful. You can support me for as little as $1 a month. $2 a month is the most popular tier, and that's the one that gets you every video uploaded free of YouTube ads, with more perks on the way. So do please consider supporting me over there if that sounds good to you. If you enjoy the content and want to see more of it just like that, it really does mean a lot. Alright everyone, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.